The hall smelled like burnt copper and old power. That was the first thing I noticed when my father pulled me through the gate of the Verk audience chamber. Not the 9-tiered gallery packed with alien courtiers, not the ceiling so high it had its own weather, not the bioluminescent banners rippling in a wind that came from nowhere. The smell, sharp, metallic, like something important had been decided here so many times that the air itself remembered it. My father's hand found the back of my neck. "Chin up, Kale." I lifted my chin. I was 11 years old, dressed in a collared shirt that had been ironed 3 times that morning, standing in the receiving hall of the Verk Sovereignty's throne world with a translator chip behind my left ear, and the full weight of Callum Colony's trade future sitting on my small shoulders. My father, Owen Morrow, was the colony's appointed envoy. He was a broad man, soft-spoken, with hands that looked like they had been carved from the same iron or he spent 30 years pulling out of the ground. He was not a politician. He was a miner who had learned to read legal documents out of necessity, and somewhere along the way, the colony had decided that made him a diplomat. He was wrong for this room. I knew it the moment we walked in. The Verk courtiers did not move exactly. They sort of adjusted a collective, almost imperceptible lean, the way a field of tall grass tilts when something small walks through it. We were the small thing. 2 humans in a chamber built for beings who stood between 7 and 9 feet tall, whose skin shifted color with their moods, whose entire civilization was 3,000 years older than humanity's first written word. My translator, Chip, fed me the ambient conversation in low murmurs. I did not let my face change. The chip gave me common tongue translation. That was its documented function. What nobody had tested, apparently, was that the chip's reception range was broader than its output range. It caught Verk's speech. It translated everything. It just did not speak the translations aloud. It fed them directly into my auditory nerve as a secondary channel, quiet as a second thought. My father heard nothing of what they were saying. I heard all of it. "Mining colony delegation," said a courtier in the 4th tier, his color shifting to the dull amber that meant mild contempt. "From the outer fringe. They want access to the corridor." "They always want access to the corridor," said another, higher up. "They always leave without it." Laughter, the Verk version, a low clicking sound like cooling metal. My father smiled at the room. He thought they were being welcoming. I kept my chin up. We were walked to the floor of the chamber, the lowest point, where petitioners stood. Above us, on a dais of white stone veined with light, sat Queen Vey Lorna. She was the tallest being I had ever seen in person. Her skin was a deep, shifting indigo, and she wore something that was not quite a crown and not quite a weapon but managed to suggest both. Her eyes were the color of deep water, and they moved over us the way you move a lamp over a floor looking for something, not expecting to find it. My father began his prepared address. He spoke clearly. He had practiced it for weeks. I had helped him with the pronunciation of the formal greeting, the 3-clause petition structure that Verk protocol required. He executed it correctly. The Queen did not look at him. She looked at me. I held the look. I did not know why, some reflex older than training. She said something in Verk to the court. The translator, Chip, was very calm about it. She said, "The little one is starring. Someone forgot to teach the pet to look at the floor." The court clicked. My father kept speaking. He did not know. His chip gave him only what was addressed to him in common tongue, and nothing had been addressed to him in common tongue yet. I was aware of my shoes. I had not been aware of them before. They were clean. My mother had cleaned them the night before the transit, kneeling on the kitchen floor with a cloth, and I remembered thinking she was wasting her time. Now I was aware of them. They were old. They were good shoes, but they were old, and the left sole had a repair seam along the inner edge where my father had glued it back together 6 months ago. The Queen said, still in Verk, to the courtier nearest her dais, "What do the outer fringe settlements run on? Or dust and optimism?" More clicking. Then in common tongue she addressed my father. She was gracious, measured. Her common tongue was perfect, faintly accented, constructed to communicate competence and authority without warmth. She denied the trade petition in 4 sentences. My father nodded through each one. He had a prepared response for denial, a counterpetition, a request for secondary review. He delivered it well. The Queen smiled, looked at me again. "Does the small one have something to add?" she said, in common tongue. "For the room." She said it the way you offer a coin to a child, not because you expect them to know its value, but because watching them reach for it amuses you. The court went quiet. My father's hand found my shoulder. Every face in 9 tiers turned toward me. I looked at the floor between me and the dais. The tiles were hexagonal, white, veined with the same bioluminescent material as the stone above. I counted them. I do not know why I started counting. I just did. 47 tiles between my shoes and the base of her throne. I looked up. "No," I said. She held my gaze for 1 more second. Then she looked away, done with me. The court clicked softly. The warmth of a good joke fully landed. We were escorted out through a side corridor. The whole meeting had taken less than 40 minutes. A guard in ceremonial armor walked ahead of us, and I stared at his back and listened to my father breathe and said nothing. Outside on the plaza, with the throne world's thin sun sitting low and pale on the horizon, my father stopped walking. He turned to me. His face was tired in the way it got when the mine had a bad quarter, not broken, just worn. "Don't let it bother you, son," he said. I said, "I'm not bothered." He looked at me for a moment. He had known me my whole life, and he could read most of my silences, but not this one. "Good," he said, and put his hand on the back of my neck again, and we kept walking. I was not bothered. I was thinking about 47 tiles. I was thinking about the fact that she had spoken for 40 minutes in a room full of beings who thought I could not understand them, and I had understood every word, and she did not know that, and she would not know that. Not yet. Not for a long time. But eventually. I filed it, the way my father filed the mine assay reports, not urgent, not emotional, just recorded, stored, available for later use. The transit ship back to Callum Colony took 9 hours. My father slept in the 2nd hour. I sat by the small porthole and watched the throne world shrink behind us, and I counted things out of habit: stars, hull rivets, the slow pulse of the navigation beacon. I thought about what power looked like from the floor of that chamber. I thought about what it would look like from the dais. I thought about the 47 tiles. I did not say any of this out loud. There was no point in saying it out loud yet. I was 11 years old, and I had just been handed something the Queen did not know she had given me. I had all the time in the world to figure out what to do with it. 8 years does not sound like a long time until you spend them building something no one can see. I was 19 when I sat the fleet entrance examination at the Frontier Recruitment Station on Callum Colony. The building was the same one they used for mining licensure, agricultural permits, and the occasional small claims hearing. There were 4 other candidates. A proctor who looked like she had rather be anywhere else ran us through the written portion in a room that smelled like recycled air and old coffee. I finished in 40 minutes. The proctor looked at my test sheet, then at me. "You can keep going," she said. "There are optional extension sections." "I know," I said. I did not pick up my pen. She collected the sheets and told us results would be transmitted within a standard week. I walked home. My father was on a late shift. The colony was quiet in the way it was always quiet, not peaceful, exactly, but emptied like a lung between breaths. I sat at the kitchen table and thought about what came next. The fleet acceptance letter arrived in 3 days, not 7. With it came a secondary document I had not expected, a conditional invitation to the officer development program, contingent on interview and psychological evaluation. The letter noted, in the dry language of institutional communication, that my examination scores had flagged for advanced placement consideration. My father read it twice. His hands were shaking slightly by the second read. "Cale," he said. "I know," I said. "You've been preparing for this." "Yes." He looked at me the way he had looked at me on the plaza outside the Verk throne chamber, like he could see the shape of something he could not name. He did not ask me what it was. He had raised me well enough to know I would tell him when it mattered. The officer development program was housed on Meridian Station, a rotating facility 4 light hours from the nearest inhabited planet. I arrived with a bag, a set of second-hand textbooks I had sourced from a fleet surplus catalog, and a translator chip that I had quietly upgraded at a tech exchange on my layover at Port Varen. The new chip was not standard issue. The new chip had a full Verk language module, noble dialect, administrative dialect, and 3 regional variants, loaded into its secondary channel. I had spent 18 months acquiring and compiling that module from academic linguistics archives, Verk cultural exchange databases, and 3 separate illegal data markets that did not need to be named. I knew why I wanted it. I had known since I was 11. The program was designed to test, break, rebuild, and test again. I did not find it hard exactly. I found it clarifying. There is a difference. Hard things resist you. Clarifying things show you where you are wasting energy, and I had learned young to cut waste. The other cadets were, on the whole, good people. There was a boy named Connor who had grown up on a water processing station and had a gift for mathematics so pure it was almost musical. There was a girl named Petra who had 3 older brothers in the fleet and had spent her entire childhood losing arguments, which had made her the sharpest debater in our cohort. There was a quiet, watchful young man named Adler who nobody paid much attention to, which meant nobody noticed he finished second in every ranking until the last month, when he finished first. I finished first in the other months. Nobody knew what to make of me exactly. I was not unfriendly. I was not cold. I was simply contained. My instructors wrote that word in my evaluations more than once. Contained. They meant it as a mild concern. I received it as a compliment. In the second year, we began xenolinguistics. The instructor was a tall, dry-humored academic named Dr. Saul Greenfield, who had spent 15 years in diplomatic translation before deciding that teaching was less likely to give him an early death. He tested our language aptitude in the first session with a Verk phrase pronunciation exercise, basic stuff, tourist-level vocabulary, the kind of thing most candidates mangled badly. I completed the exercise. Dr. Greenfield looked at his tablet, looked at me. "Mr. Morrow," he said. "Sir, you speak Verk?" "Yes." With no accent, he paused. "With a specific accent, actually, High Court Noble Register. Where did you learn that?" "Listening," I said. He waited for the rest of it. I did not produce a rest of it. He studied me for another moment, then moved on to the next candidate. But from that point forward, he treated our one-on-ones differently, as conversations rather than instruction. He had recognized something. He did not know what it was pointed at. He just knew it was pointed. In the third year, we began intelligence methodology. This was where things became interesting in the way that a finely made tool is interesting, not because of how it looks, but because of what it can do. I learned about information asymmetry. The principle is simple. The person who knows more than their counterpart does not need to be stronger or louder or more powerful. They need only to wait for the moment when their information advantage produces a result, and then let the result speak. I had been practicing this since I was 11 years old, without knowing there was a name for it. There was a name for it. I found that satisfying. In the fourth year, my cohort began strategic placement internships. Connor went to Fleet Engineering. Petra went to JAG. Adler went to Command Track. I submitted a first-choice request for Fleet Intelligence. My placement officer called me in. "Your scores qualify you for Command Track directly," she said. Her name was Lieutenant Hayworth, and she was efficient and not unkind. "Fleet Intelligence is a longer route to senior rank. Are you sure?" "Yes," I said. "Any particular reason?" I thought about 47 tiles. I thought about a room where I had understood everything and no one had known it. "I prefer to know more than I need," I said. She wrote something on her tablet. Then, "That's either a very good quality for intelligence work or a very concerning one." "I think that depends on whose side you're on," I said. She smiled despite herself, approved the placement. I spent the next year embedded in a fleet intelligence field unit assigned to the Verk border region. I was background, administrative support. No one handed an intern anything sensitive in the first 6 months, and I did not ask for anything sensitive. I filed reports. I organized data streams. I attended briefings and sat in the back and listened. The Verk sovereignty's internal structure became, over those months, something I understood the way you understand a piece of machinery after you have held every individual component, not through analysis but through familiarity. Their vassal system relationships, their logistics dependencies, the quiet friction between the outer vassal governors and the throne. The friction was the interesting part. Friction is where force becomes available. I was not doing anything with this information yet. I was 19, then 20, and I was still in the phase that most people mistake for patience, but is actually something slightly different. I was loading. There is a mechanism in certain mining charges, the kind my father's crew used on deep vein rock, where the actual explosion is not the point. The point is the compression that happens first. The explosion is just the compression finding its exit. I was compressing. At night in the small bunk I had been assigned on the unit's relay station, I went over what I had. The language, the structure, the friction points, the tile count that had become a habit of mind, measuring distances, counting intervals, knowing exactly how much space stood between where I was and where I needed to be. I had a recording. I kept it on a personal data chip. Not the original, there was no original recording. The moment had happened and passed like all moments. What I had was a notation I had made the evening after the throne chamber visit, sitting in my bunk on the transit ship at age 11, writing down what she had said, and when she had said it and how many people had heard it. I did not play it back. I had not played it back in 8 years. There was no need. The record was not there for grief. It was not a wound I was keeping open. It was a receipt. And I intended, when the time came, to present it. The assignment came through as a standard diplomatic attachment posting. That is what it looked like on paper. I was 24 years old, holding the rank of Fleet Intelligence Analyst, and the document described me as a junior attaché assigned to a secondary support role in a goodwill mission to the Verk sovereignty. Our senior officer was Commander Neil Hurst, a career diplomat with a good handshake and a talent for holding a neutral expression through anything. I had drafted the mission parameters. Hurst did not know that. Nobody in my direct chain of command knew that, because the drafting had not happened through my direct chain of command. It had happened through a series of analytical recommendations I had submitted over 26 months to a senior intelligence review board that processed recommendations, the way large systems process most inputs, slowly, impersonally, and without tracking the origin closely enough. My recommendations had suggested, in clear and well-sourced terms, that the Verk sovereignty's internal stability was deteriorating, that 3 of its vassal systems were showing measurable drift toward independence, that the window for a favorable renegotiation of transit rights through the Verk corridor, rights which the frontier fleet had been unsuccessfully pursuing for 11 years, was open, but narrow. The review board had agreed. The mission had been approved. I was on it as background furniture, which was exactly where I wanted to be. The Verk diplomatic complex that received us was on a secondary world, not the throne world. It was smaller and more functional than the audience chamber of my childhood, clean lines, minimal ceremony. A conference architecture designed for working sessions rather than performances. I noted the tiles, white-gray composite, rectangular. I counted the rows between the conference table and the far wall. 31. Different room, different number. I noted it and moved on. Hurst handled the first session competently. The Verk delegation was led by a senior court official named Verkesh Nari, not the Queen, not yet, but a high-ranking proxy who carried himself like a man who had the Queen's ear and knew it. He was polite and unhurried and very carefully said nothing in 4 hours of talking. I sat one chair behind and to the left of Hurst. I took notes on a physical pad. I did not look up much. Nari noticed this. I felt him noticing it the same way you feel, whether before it arrives. At the session recess, I went to the side corridor where the water station was, and I was pouring a glass when I heard footsteps that were not Hurst's and not any of the human staff. Nari came around the corner. He stopped when he saw me. Then he came to the water station and poured his own glass with the deliberate ease of a man who had decided to be casual about this. He spoke in Verk, not common tongue. He said, "The junior attaché takes very detailed notes for someone who has not looked at his notepad in 2 hours." I answered him in Verk, noble register, his dialect. "The notes are not for the content," I said. "The content I already have." He went still. Not frightened still, calibrating still. He was a sharp man and he was recalculating. "You speak Verk," he said in Verk, like a man confirming the temperature of something he had just touched. "Noble register, administrative dialect and 3 regional variants," I said. "Your specific dialect is Northern Court, outer province's origin but educated at the Central Academy. The accent is a blend." He looked at me for a long moment. "How long have you spoken our language?" he said. "Since I was 11, I said, "give or take." He drank his water, slowly. "You attended the Morrow delegation," he said. It was not a question. He had the same quality of mind I had, the kind that does not waste words checking things it is already certain of. "My father was the envoy," I said. "I was the translator." He was quiet for a moment. "The Queen made a remark," he said. "Several," I said. He set his glass down. I watched him work through the arithmetic of it. 11 years old, understands Verk, does not react, does not reveal it, grows up, joins fleet intelligence, ends up in a conference room on a mission that had been structured. He now suspected, more precisely than standard diplomatic postings were usually structured. He was a smart man, he got there. "What do you want?" he said. Not hostile, professional. He was asking the way you ask a counterpart whose position you have just identified across the table. "What I want is in the mission brief," I said. "Transit rights, corridor access, standard terms." "And what you actually want?" I poured myself a second glass of water. "Those are the same thing," I said. He studied me for a long moment. Then something in his face settled, not acceptance, not warmth, but the particular stillness of a man who has decided to take a threat seriously without advertising that he has. He walked back into the conference room without another word. That afternoon's session ran differently. Nari did not push against Hurst's proposals the way he had in the morning. He listened more. He asked different questions that felt, to Hurst, like progress, but were actually Nari taking measurement. He was figuring out the shape of what I had built before he decided how to respond to it. That evening in the debrief, Hurst said he thought the session had gone well. "Better than expected," he said. with the quiet satisfaction of a man who believed the progress was his own. "Yes," I said. In my room that night, I sat at the small desk and went over the sovereignty's vassal system data. The first system, HFY, an agricultural world that supplied 30% of the sovereignty's food production, had been sending signals through back channels for 19 months. Not through me directly, not officially, but through the information architecture I had helped shape. They wanted independent trade licensing. They were close to a formal declaration. I had not manufactured their desire for independence. That was an important distinction. I had never put words in anyone's mouth. I had never falsified a document or forged a signal or invented a grievance. What I had done was make sure that the people who had genuine grievances had the information they needed to act on them, and that the information reached them through channels that did not trace back to a human hand. There is a word for this in intelligence methodology: facilitation. It sounds cleaner than it is. I was aware of that. I had never pretended otherwise to myself. What I had done had consequences for real people on real worlds, and I held that weight every time I sat down at a desk and moved a piece. The second vassal system, Rensaleth, an industrial hub, was 14 months behind HFY on the same trajectory. The third, Dorving, a transit corridor hub through which 60% of Verk shipping passed, was watching both of them and saying nothing publicly, while its governor had quiet conversations with fleet trade liaisons that he was careful not to call negotiations. The sovereignty needed that corridor hub. Without Dorving, the sovereignty's interior logistics collapsed. And Dorvin was negotiating. I had not built this in a year or even in 2 years. I had built it in 5, across 3 postings and a chain of recommendations that stretched back to my first intelligence placement at 20. Every piece had been laid with the deliberate, unhurried care of a man who had learned, at 11 years old, that the most dangerous position is the one that looks like furniture. Nori had a decision to make. He could tell the Queen what he had found, a human intelligence officer who had been speaking her language for 13 years without revealing it, who had likely shaped the conditions of this mission, who may or may not have had a hand in the vassal system instability. Or he could decide that the Queen finding out was not in his interest, because the question of why he had not identified this earlier would fall on him. I did not know which way he would go. I went to sleep. In the morning, Nori arrived at the session table before anyone else. He had a new set of documents in front of him. He pushed them toward Hurst when the session opened. A counter-proposal on corridor access. Hurst's eyebrows went up slightly. It was more favorable than anything the fleet had received in a decade. I did not let my face change. I wrote something on my notepad. What I wrote was 31. Then I circled it. Then I closed the pad. 3 years passed the way deep vein work passes, steadily, quietly, and then all at once you look up and the thing you have been building is finished. I was 27 years old when I was assigned as lead negotiator. There was no ceremony around it, no speech, no ceremony of promotion, no moment where someone handed me a title and a handshake. I received an assignment document and a classified briefing packet and a travel itinerary. My direct supervisor, a lean and careful woman named Deputy Director Oren, called me into her office, looked at me for a long moment and said, "The board is comfortable with your placement on this." "Good," I said. "They also noted," she said, "that several members had a difficult time tracing the full chain of your prior influence on the conditions that created this summit." "Analysis is iterative," I said. She looked at me the way Nori had looked at me 3 years earlier, with the specific expression of someone who has just confirmed a suspicion they were not entirely comfortable having confirmed. "Kale," she said. "Ma'am, this is not a punishment mission. The board wants the treaty. They want the corridor. They want you to get it. I know. They also want you to know that if this produces a diplomatic incident. It won't, I said. She held the look for another moment. No, she said, I don't think it will. The summit was held on Vale Station, a neutral orbital facility in the space between frontier and sovereignty territory. It was chosen by mutual agreement, which meant it had been suggested by someone and agreed to by both sides, and the someone who had suggested it had chosen it because its conference architecture accommodated the Verk delegation's ceremonial requirements, while its security protocols favored fleet personnel with fleet standard clearance. I had suggested it. Through an intermediary, through a preference survey. Through the kind of four-step remove that made a suggestion look like a compromise. I stepped off the transport and onto the station concourse and counted the ceiling panels out of habit. The Verk delegation had arrived the previous day. They were housed in the station's eastern residential block. I was housed in the western. The conference chamber was a large, circular room with a vaulted ceiling and floor panels of pale gray stone, not hexagonal, not white-veined, but I counted them anyway as I did the walkthrough with the station coordinator. 62. Larger room, higher stakes. I noted the difference and moved on. The first session was scheduled for 9 that morning. I arrived at 7:30 and sat at the table alone and read through the briefing materials I already knew by memory. At 8:50, the Verk delegation filed in. She was with them. I had known she would be. Her attendance had been confirmed in the protocol documents 2 weeks prior. I had read that confirmation the same way I read everything, without drama, without shift in pulse, because I had known this moment was coming for 16 years, and I had prepared for it the way you prepare for a thing that is already done. Queen Valorna was exactly as I remembered her. That surprised me slightly. I had expected memory to have made her larger, or stranger, or somehow different from the reality. But she walked into the room, and she was the same 9 feet of indigo-toned authority, bioluminescence shifting in her skin, the not-quite crown sitting at the crown of her head, and those deep-water eyes moving across the room the way they had moved across a petition chamber when I was 11 years old. They moved across me. No recognition. I had not expected recognition. I had not been hopping for it. I mention it simply as a fact. She looked at me, the human in the lead position across the conference table, and she processed me as a category. Frontier Fleet, lead negotiator, unknown variable moderate significance. I was furniture to her. Still, for now, I let Hurst, who had been brought along as a senior advisor, a professional courtesy, open the session with the formal diplomatic welcome. I sat beside him, this time at the table rather than behind it, and I watched the Verk delegation settle. Nori was there. He found me immediately. Our eyes met and he did not change expression, but there was something in his stillness that was communicative. He knew what room this was. He knew what was in it. The first session covered framework, the structural terms of a potential corridor access agreement, the duration parameters, the mutual sovereignty clauses. Standard opening language. The Queen spoke twice briefly to clarify her delegation's position on 2 points. Her common tongue was the same as I remembered, perfect, faintly accented, constructed for competence. I spoke 4 times. Each time I spoke, I watched her. Not overtly, I was looking at documents at the table at Hurst, making the eye contact pattern of a professional doing a job. But I was watching her the way you watch a pressure gauge when you are standing next to a system under load. She was bored. Not dismissive, not hostile, simply bored. The way a great ship is bored of navigating small water. She had done 1,000 of these sessions. She would do 1,000 more. The specific human across the table was not a variable she had assigned significance to yet. The first session ended. A recess was called. The second session opened after lunch. Midway through, I was presenting the fleet's position on corridor sharing protocols when she interrupted. not rudely. She raised one hand in the gesture the Verk used to signal a point of clarification, and I stopped speaking and she said, "You are from the outer fringe." It was not a question. "Yes," I said. "A mining settlement." "Callum Colony," I said. "Outer Rim, iron ore extraction primarily." She studied me. "You were at the Morrow delegation," she said. The room went quiet. Not dramatically quiet. Professionally quiet, the specific hush of a conference chamber when something unexpected enters the record. Nari was very still. "Yes," I said. "My father was the envoy. I was 11. She said nothing for a moment. "You speak our language," she said, "in Verk." I answered her in Verk, Noble Register, her dialect precisely. Noble Register, administrative dialect and 3 regional variants, I said. I have spoken it since I was 11 years old. I understood every word spoken in the audience chamber during the Morrow delegation, including the remarks made in Verk that were not addressed to the human delegation. The room was very quiet now. She held my gaze. There is a color that appears in Verk bioluminescent skin when a person is recalibrating in real time, not shocked, not afraid, but recalculating at full speed. It is a faint blue-white pulse at the temples, barely visible, the kind of thing you would miss if you did not know to look for it. I had read about it in a xenobiology text at age 14. I could see it now. "You remember what I said," she said. "I remember everything you said," I said, "in the order you said it, with the names of the courtiers who laughed." She was quiet. I let her be quiet. Then I said, "With respect, I would like to continue with the corridor sharing protocols. We are at Clause 14. The session continued. It was the strangest thing that the session simply continued. Documents were referenced. Positions were clarified. The 2 delegations worked through 7 more clauses before the day's session ended. And through all of it, Queen Vaelorna of the Verk Sovereignty sat at her side of the table and did her job with full professional precision, and so did I. But the room had changed. Nori knew it. I could tell from the way he moved his pen, small taps against the table, a tell I had catalogued in 3 prior sessions, and which meant he was processing. She knew it. I could tell from the blue-white pulse that came and went at her temples, faint and fast, through the afternoon. I knew it because I had planned for exactly this. Not the drama of it, the drama was incidental. The point was simpler than drama. The point was, she now knew I had been in the room. She now knew that every session, every communication, every room that had involved a human intelligence presence over the past 6 years might have had a kale-shaped variable in it. She could not verify which ones. She could not trace the full shape of what I had built because I had built it specifically to resist tracing. She would try, she would have her people try. They would find pieces but not the whole. And in the meantime, she needed this treaty. She needed the corridor. Her empire needed what I was offering. In the final hour of the day's final session, she said, in common tongue, to the room at large, "The Frontier Fleet has sent their most patient representative." It was not a compliment exactly. It was not an insult. It was the sound of a door opening, a small one, narrow but open. I said, "We are here to reach an agreement that serves both parties." "Yes," she said, "we are." The session ended. I walked back to the Western residential block and sat at my desk and opened my briefing materials and did not think about 11-year-old shoes or hexagonal tiles or the sound of clicking laughter in a 9-tiered gallery. I thought about the treaty language for Section 4. I worked until past midnight. I ate a meal I did not taste. I slept. The treaty was signed 11 weeks after the summit opened. Not because negotiations were easy. They were not. There were 4 sessions that nearly collapsed over corridor exclusivity clauses, 2 over the mutual sovereignty language, and one remarkable afternoon, where the entire Verk delegation walked out over a translation discrepancy in Article 7 that turned out to be a genuine error in the common tongue version, and not, as their lead counsel had initially suggested, a deliberate misrepresentation. I had caught the error myself the night before. I had flagged it. The correction was already prepared when they raised it. Nori looked at me across the table when I produced the corrected document. I said nothing. He said nothing. The session continued. When the final document was signed, it described the terms as a joint access corridor agreement with shared administrative oversight, mutual sovereignty protections, and a 15-year review clause. Every word was accurate. The words also, if you understood the administrative architecture behind them, described a relationship in which the Verk sovereignty's most critical logistics channel would operate under a framework that required frontier fleet consent for any significant operational change. Not control. Not occupation. Consent. It is a smaller word than control, but it does the same work. Director Oren called me the evening after the signing. "The board is very pleased," she said. "Good," I said. "There is talk of a senior position opening in the next review cycle." "I'll look at the posting when it comes through," I said. She paused. "Kale," she said, "are you all right?" I thought about it honestly. "Yes," I said. She accepted that. We ended the call. 3 years passed. I turned 29 in the middle of a standard workday. I remember because Adler, we had crossed paths at a briefing that week, him now in command, me in intelligence, both of us senior enough to be in the same rooms again, brought me a flat, dense cake from a bakery near the station we were both working out of, and set it on my desk without ceremony. "Heard it was your day," he said. "Who told you?" "Personnel file." "You read my personnel file." "I was bored," he said. "Happy birthday." He left. I ate a piece of the cake. It was very good. The filling was a dark fruit preserve that had a slight bitterness to it that made the sweet parts taste more accurate. I noted that. Went back to work. The invitation arrived 4 months later. It came through official diplomatic channels, formatted correctly, carrying the proper authentication seals of the Verk sovereignty. It was an invitation to attend the sovereignty's centennial address as a featured diplomatic presence of the frontier fleet. My name was on it, my rank, my full title. Her name was on the signature line. Hurst stopped by my desk and read it over my shoulder. "She invited you specifically," he said. "Yes." "That's unusual." "Yes," I said. He stood there a moment. "Are you going?" I looked at the invitation. It was printed on Verk formal paper, a material that carries faint bioluminescent pigment, so it shifts color slightly as the light changes. It had been brought in from the courier's transport that morning. It had been traveling for several days. It was still warm from the transit, or I was imagining that. "Yes," I said. The throne world looked different from how I remembered it. Or rather, it looked exactly the same and I was different, and the difference made it look smaller. Not small, it was still a world of 9-tiered galleries and ceilings that had their own weather and stone veined with light. But I was not looking up at it the way an 11-year-old looks up at a thing that has decided it is larger than him. I was looking at it straight. The centennial address was held in the Grand Assembly Hall, a larger space than the audience chamber, built for public address rather than private petition. The gallery tiers rose on 3 sides. The floor was open, designed for an audience of standing dignitaries, and I stood in the 3rd row of the Frontier Fleet's diplomatic presence in a suit that had been made for me by a tailor on Meridian Station who charged very little and cut very well. I counted the floor panels. 116. I noted it, moved on. The address began with ceremony. The Verk version, which involves a sound produced by a particular instrument that has no common tongue name, and which produces a tone that sits just at the edge of the human hearing range, so you feel it more than hear it. The tone ran through the hall and through my chest, and I stood straight and let it. She entered from the high dais. I had seen her 3 times since I was 11 years old. In the summit, in the corridor negotiations, and twice in technical review sessions that she attended briefly as a formality. Each time, I had watched her the way I watched everything, with the full attention of someone who had been taking notes since before he was old enough to know what the notes were for. She was unchanged. The Verk age slowly compared to humans. She would look the same for another century. She delivered the address in Verk. It was a formal piece, political history, national identity, the language of institutional pride that all long-lived civilizations develop for their significant anniversaries. I followed every word without the chip's help. I had not needed the chip for Verk in 8 years. She spoke about the sovereignty's achievements, about its challenges, about the changing landscape of the outer systems. She spoke about the Corridor Treaty. She said it marked a new phase of Verk engagement with the frontier systems, a relationship of shared interest and mutual respect. Then she said in Verk to the hall, "The frontier fleet has sent their most patient weapon to witness this." She looked at me when she said it. The hall turned, 3,000 beings oriented toward the human row, and I was the one she was looking at. A weapon, not an insult, not a compliment. An accurate description. I held her gaze. She continued the address. After, there was a reception in the smaller hall adjacent. Dignitaries moved in clusters. I stood with the fleet's delegation, drank something that tasted like mineral water with a faint green bitterness, and spoke with several Verk officials about technical protocol details that needed no conversation, but were the currency of these events. After 40 minutes, a court attendant found me and said, in Verk, that the Queen would receive the fleet's representative in the side corridor in 10 minutes. I set down my glass. I walked to the corridor. It was narrow and lit by the bioluminescent panels the Verk used for interior spaces, no harsh overhead light, just a warm, shifting blue-white glow that moved slowly along the walls. It felt like standing inside something alive. She was already there when I arrived. No court attendants, no advisors, no Nari. I had looked for him in the reception, and he had caught my eye once and given me nothing, which was his version of a great deal. Just her. She was standing with her hands at her sides, which is the Verk formal resting posture. She was looking at the wall panel nearest her, watching the bioluminescent light move through it. I stopped at a comfortable speaking distance. She turned. "You came," she said, in common tongue. "You invited me," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. "When Nori told me," she said, "about the language, about how long you had spoken it, I had my intelligence office run a review of all significant diplomatic contacts involving frontier fleet intelligence in the past 8 years. I waited. They found pieces," she said. "They could not find the whole shape of it." "No," I said, "they would not." She was quiet. I did not feel the quiet. "The vassal systems," she said, "were unhappy with their terms before I was born," I said. "I did not manufacture their unhappiness. I helped certain people understand their options. And the summit location, the corridor framework, the consent clauses, all of those were built from your situation," I said. "I did not invent your logistics dependency on Dorving. I simply understood it before you chose to show it." She looked at me. The blue-white pulse was there at her temples, faint, fast, the same calibration signal I had first seen across a conference table 3 years ago. "You could have aimed differently," she said. "You had enough to build something that would have reduced us significantly." "Yes," I said. "Why didn't you?" I had known this question was coming. I had known it since I was 24, standing in a side corridor with Nari drinking water, being asked a version of the same question. I had the answer ready. I had always had it ready. It was small and true, and I was not going to dress it up. Because I didn't want you reduced, I said. I wanted you to know I could have. She went still. Not the calibration stillness, a different kind. The kind that happens when a thing you thought was one shape turns out to be another. The boy in the audience chamber, she said. Yes. I don't remember him. I know, I said. I say things in my own language when I believe I am not understood, she said. It was as close to an acknowledgement as her dignity would allow, and I recognized it for what it was. Most people do, I said. She looked at the bioluminescent wall for a moment. Then she said, in Verk, not in common tongue, but in Verk, in her own dialect, in the register she used when she was not performing for a room. You are a very strange kind of enemy. I answered her in the same register, the same dialect, the same register she used when she was not performing. I was never your enemy, I said. I was your consequence. She looked at me. There it was. The thing I had waited 18 years to say, not to wound her, not to reduce her, not to stand over her the way she had stood over an 11-year-old boy in a petition chamber and found him categorically small, just to say it accurately. She had laughed. Here was what the laugh had made. She was quiet for a long time. The bioluminescent panels moved their slow light across the corridor walls. The sounds of the reception filtered through from the adjacent hall, Verk instruments, the movement of hundreds of beings, the ambient noise of civilization doing what civilization does. Finally she said in Verk, very quietly, "What does Callum Colony need?" I looked at her. There it was. Not submission, not defeat. A door, opening, the same narrow one that had opened across a conference table 3 years ago, but wider now. The door of a being who has taken full measure of a situation and decided that the most intelligent response is to stop pretending the measure was not taken. Expanded mineral rights in the outer corridor band, I said. Standard licensing, free trade terms, and a direct trade route through Dorvan that doesn't require sovereignty transit fees. She was quiet. That benefits Callum Colony significantly, she said. Yes, I said. My father spent 30 years pulling iron ore out of rock to keep that colony running. He went to your chamber once and asked politely and was told no in 4 sentences. She held my gaze. I will have my trade office contact the fleet's outer colony liaison, she said. That's all I needed, I said. She looked at me one more time, long, assessing, the way you look at a piece of machinery after you have understood how it works and are deciding what to do with that understanding. Then she walked back toward the reception hall. I stood in the corridor alone. The bioluminescent light moved. I thought about my father's hands, the weight of them on the back of my neck, the calluses, the 3 attempts at ironing a shirt, the way he had said don't let it bother you on a plaza in the thin light of a throne world's pale sun, and meant it with his whole heart and been wrong and right at the same time. It had bothered me. It had bothered me in the most productive way a thing can bother a person. I thought about the 47 tiles. I did not need them anymore. I had not needed them in years, if I was being honest. The habit of counting had stayed longer than the reason for it. I counted the corridor panels anyway. 22. I noted it. Walked back into the hall. Found Adler near the entrance, because of course Adler was here. He was command track now, senior enough for centennial addresses, quiet enough to find the edge of any room. How'd it go, he said. Fine, I said. He handed me another glass of the mineral bitter water. You always say that, he said. It's usually accurate, I said. We stood at the edge of the hall and watched the room and said nothing for a while. The Verk instruments played something that I recognized as a centennial hymn, a piece about continuity, about the long thread of a civilization's survival, about enduring. I had read the lyrics once in an academic archive. They were less grand in the original language than they seemed when translated. Most things were. Owen Morrow was still on Callum Colony. He was retired from the mines now. His back had made the decision for him, firmly and without appeal, 2 years ago. He lived in the same house I had grown up in. He grew a small garden in the strip of dirt behind the residence block that caught morning light. He had written to me last month that the tomatoes were doing well. I thought about calling him when I got back to my quarters. I would tell him about the Dwarven trade route. Not the full story, there was a full story he did not need and would not enjoy knowing, but the outcome. He had gone to that chamber for the colony. I had gone back for the colony. That was the simple version, and it was true. He would be happy about the tomatoes and the trade route and probably ask nothing further, because he was that kind of man, the kind who trusted that things had been handled well without needing the weight of the method. I loved him for that. I had never told him about the tiles. Maybe I would when I called. Maybe not. I drank my water. The hall moved around me. I stood still in it. That was enough.